The wind had a name out here in the Badlands of West Texas, but nobody was left alive to speak it. It scraped across the cracked earth like a living thing, cruel and relentless, carrying the dust of forgotten dreams. Sarah Layton walked through that wind with her head down and her jaw set. She'd been walking for 6 days now. 6 days without a real meal. 6 days with nothing but a few sips of muddy water from a creek that had nearly dried up. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her skin would burn dark from the sun. Her dress, once blue, was now the color of the desert itself. But she kept walking. She had promised herself that she would not die out here. Not like this, not as a nobody. In her right hand she carried the skillet. It was heavy, nearly 8 pounds of solid black iron, and her arm ached from holding it. But she would not put it down. The handle was wrapped in strips of leather that her mother had cut from an old belt years ago. The leather was worn smooth now from use. This skillet had cooked 1,000 meals. It had fed her family through hard winters and dry summers. It was the only thing of value she had left. In her left hand, pressed against her chest, she held the small pouch made of deerskin. Inside were the last of her mother's spices, cumin that still smelled of the earth it came from, dried oregano from the garden behind their old cabin, smoked chili powder that her mother had made herself, one single bay leaf, brown and brittle, that Sarah treated like gold. These spices were more than flavoring. They were memories. They were her mother's voice saying that food was not just fuel for the body. Food was love made visible. Food could turn strangers into family. Food could heal wounds that medicine could not touch. Her mother had died 3 months ago. Consumption, the doctor had called it. Sarah had watched her fade away over the course of a year, coughing blood into white handkerchiefs until there were no clean handkerchiefs left. At the end, her mother had weighed less than a child. She had held Sarah's hand and told her to keep cooking, to never stop feeding people, to remember that even the smallest act of kindness could change someone's life. Then she had closed her eyes and stopped breathing. After the funeral, Sarah's stepfather had sold everything: the cabin, the furniture, even her mother's wedding ring. He had taken the money and disappeared, leaving Sarah with nothing but the clothes on her back, the skillet in her hand, and the pouch of spices pressed against her heart. She had tried to find work. God knows she had tried. She had walked from town to town, knocking on doors, offering to cook or clean or do laundry. But everywhere she went, the answer was the same. We do not need you. We do not want you. Go away. In one town, a woman had looked at her ragged dress and sunburned face and laughed. You think anyone would let you near their kitchen looking like that, the woman had said. You are not worth the scraps we feed the dogs. Those words had burned into Sarah's memory like a brand. You are not worth the scraps we feed the dogs. She had heard variations of that message her whole life, from her stepfather who called her useless, from the children at school who called her trash, from the shopkeepers who watched her like a criminal whenever she entered their stores. But she had kept walking, because somewhere deep inside her, in a place that the world had not managed to destroy, she still believed that she had something to offer. Her mother had seen it. Her mother had nurtured it. And Sarah would not let that belief die, even if the rest of the world wanted her to. The sun was beginning to set when she saw the town. At first she thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat in her exhausted mind. But as she got closer, she could see that the buildings were real. They were broken and abandoned, their windows shattered and their doors hanging open. But they were real. A wooden sign hung from one rusted hinge at the edge of town, swinging back and forth in the wind. Sarah squinted at the faded letters carved into the wood. Redemption. She almost laughed. What a name for a place like this. A ghost town at the edge of nowhere, named after a concept that felt as distant as the stars. But she was too tired to laugh, and too desperate to turn away. She walked down the main street, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. The buildings on either side of her had once been full of life. A general store with empty shelves, a saloon with no bottles behind the bar, a blacksmith shop where the forge had gone cold years ago, a church with a fallen steeple. People had lived here once. They had worked and laughed and loved. They had built homes and raised children. And then something had happened. Something had driven them all away or killed them where they stood. Now there was nothing left but the wind and the dust and the memories of what had been. Sarah found a well in the center of town, right beneath an old wooden gallows that cast a long shadow in the fading light. The rope was frayed and the bucket was gone, but the well itself still held water. She could smell it, that faint mineral scent of moisture in a dry land. Using her own length of cord and a small tin pot from her pack, she lowered it down into the darkness. When she pulled it back up, the water was brown and tasted like rust, but it was wet. And right now, that was enough. She gathered wood from a fallen porch and built a small fire in the middle of the street. Her hands moved automatically, following patterns her mother had taught her years ago. Kindling first, arranged in a small pyramid. Then larger sticks, placed carefully to allow air to flow. She struck one of her precious matches, shielding the flame with her body until the fire caught and began to grow. When the skillet was hot, she opened the deerskin pouch. The smell hit her like a wave. Cumin and oregano and chili, the scent of her mother's kitchen, the scent of home. She had a handful of dried pinto beans that she had found 3 days ago, growing wild near an abandoned cabin. She poured them into the skillet with some water and a pinch of salt. Then she added her spices. Just a little, just enough. The beans began to simmer. Sarah sat beside the fire and watched the stars come out one by one. The sky out here was enormous, stretching from horizon to horizon without a single tree or building to break the view. She felt very small beneath that sky, very alone. But the smell of the cooking beans wrapped around her like a blanket, and for just a moment, she did not feel quite so lost. She ate slowly once the beans were done, making each bite last as long as she could. The food was simple, but the spices transformed it into something more. Something that tasted like memory. Something that tasted like love. She was cleaning the skillet with sand when she heard footsteps behind her. Sarah's hand tightened on the skillet handle as she spun around. Out here in the wasteland, strangers meant danger. Everyone knew that. A woman alone was a target for anyone with bad intentions and no conscience. But the figure that stepped into the firelight was not a bandit or a thief. It was an old man, his face weathered like the desert itself, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. He wore clothes that had once been fine but were now patched and faded. His boots were worn through at the toes. He did not move toward her. He just stood there, breathing in the air, his head tilted back slightly, like a man trying to remember something important. "That smell," he said finally. His voice was dry and soft, like wind through dead grass. "I have not smelled cooking like that in 20 years. Sarah did not answer. She kept her grip on the skillet, ready to swing if she needed to. The old man took another breath. "That is not just beans," he said. "That is a kitchen. That is someone who knows that food is more than filling an empty stomach." He told her his name was Don Silvano. He asked if she had any to spare. And Sarah, despite every instinct telling her to protect what little she had, reached into the skillet and scooped out a spoonful. She handed it to him without asking for payment, because her mother had taught her that food was meant to be shared. Don Silvano ate slowly, his eyes closed, his expression changing with each bite. When he was finished, he looked at Sarah differently. Not like she was a vagrant or a beggar, but like she was someone worth seeing. "Who taught you to cook like this?" he asked. "My mother," Sarah said. It was the first time she had spoken in days. Her voice came out rough and unused. Don Silvano nodded slowly. "There is a ranch to the north," he said. "Rancho El Mato. The man who runs it is named Ignacio Ramirez. He is hard and cold, and he does not give anything away for free. But he is fair, and he understands a value when he sees it." He looked at Sarah for a long moment. "You have value," he said. "Even if you do not know it yet." Sarah walked north with Don Silvano for 2 days. He did not talk much, and she was grateful for that. Her throat was still raw from days of silence, and words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she had almost forgotten how to speak. But he taught her things without words. He showed her how to find water in the desert by watching where the birds flew at dawn. He pointed out plants that were safe to eat and plants that would kill you within hours. He walked slowly so that she could keep up, even though she knew he could have moved faster on his own. On the second night, they camped beside a dry creek bed. The sky was purple with twilight, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Don Silvano built a small fire while Sarah cooked. She had found some wild onions growing near a rock formation, and she sliced them thin and fried them in the skillet with the last of her beans. The old man ate every bite. "Tell me about yourself," Sarah said finally. It was the most she had spoken since they met. Don Silvano was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to talk. He told her that he had once been a wealthy man. He had owned land and cattle and a house with 12 rooms. He had a wife named Elena who had the most beautiful laugh he had ever heard. They had been married for 30 years. They had raised 4 children together. And then the drought came. 3 years of no rain. The cattle died first, their bodies bloating in the sun. Then the crops failed. Then the money ran out. Don Silvano sold everything he had, piece by piece, trying to hold on. But it was never enough. Elena got sick from the bad water they were forced to drink. She died in his arms on a night very much like this one. After that, he had started walking. He did not know where he was going. He just knew that he could not stay in the place where his whole life had fallen apart. "I've been walking for 5 years now," Don Silvano said. His voice was calm, as if he were talking about someone else. "I go from place to place, doing odd jobs when I can find them, sleeping under the stars when I cannot. I have nothing left except the clothes on my back and the memories in my head." He looked at Sarah across the fire. "But when I smelled your cooking tonight," he said slowly, "I remembered something I had forgotten. I remembered that there is still goodness in this world, even when everything else has been taken away. There are still people who know how to make something beautiful out of nothing." Sarah did not know what to say. She looked down at her skillet, worn smooth from years of use, and thought about her mother, about all the meals they had shared, about all the love that had gone into every single one. "My mother always said that food is memory," she said quietly, "that when you feed someone, you are giving them a piece of yourself." Don Silvano nodded. "Your mother was a wise woman." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Sarah finally fell asleep, she dreamed of her mother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking, the sound of laughter, the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. The next morning, they reached a fork in the road. The path to the left led west, toward the mountains. The path to the right led north, toward a line of fence posts that stretched as far as the eye could see. Don Silvano stopped. "This is where I leave you," he said. Sarah felt a sudden panic. "But I do not know what to do. I do not know what to say to this man, Ramirez." The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of dried fruit. He pressed it into her hand along with a leather canteen filled with water. "Follow the fence," he said. "It will lead you to the ranch. When you get there, do not beg. Do not apologize for being there. Just tell him the truth. Tell him what you can do, and let your cooking speak for itself." He started to turn away, then stopped. "One more thing," he said. "Ignacio Ramirez is not a cruel man, but he is a broken one. He lost his wife and son in a fire 15 years ago. He survived by building walls around himself so high that no one can get through. If you want to reach him, you will have to find a way past those walls." Sarah stared at him. "How do you know all this?" Don Silvano smiled sadly. "Because I knew him once," he said, "a long time ago, before the world took everything from both of us." Then he turned and walked away, heading west toward the mountains. Sarah watched him until he was just a speck on the horizon. Then he was gone. She stood alone at the fork in the road, the wind pulling at her hair, the desert stretching out in every direction. She was tired and hungry and scared. Part of her wanted to just sit down and give up, to let the desert take her the way it had taken so many others. But she thought about Donna Silvano's words. "You have value, even if you do not know it yet." She thought about her mother's voice. "Keep cooking. Never stop feeding people." She gripped the handle of her skillet and started walking north. The fence was old but well-maintained, its wooden posts straight and evenly spaced. Someone had put a lot of work into building it. Someone who cared about keeping things in order. Sarah walked beside it for hours, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. By mid-afternoon, she could see the ranch in the distance. Strong wooden buildings clustered together like a small town. Long fences dividing the land into pastures where horses and cattle grazed. Smoke rising from a forge somewhere. The sound of hammers and voices carrying faintly on the wind. It was bigger than she had expected. Much bigger. This was not some small family operation. This was an empire. Sarah stopped at the main gate. 2 massive posts supported an iron archway with words wrought into the metal. Rancho Amado. Beneath the words was a symbol she did not recognize, a flame inside a circle. She waited. A young man on horseback noticed her after a few minutes. He rode over slowly, looking her up and down with obvious suspicion. He was maybe 18 or 19, with a thin mustache and clothes that were dusty from work. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was not friendly. "I would like to speak with Mr. Ramirez," Sarah said. She was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Inside, her heart was pounding. The young man laughed. "Mr. Ramirez does not meet with beggars. Go away before I call the dogs." "I am not a beggar," Sarah said. "I am a cook, and I have something to offer." The young man laughed again, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. He looked at the skillet in her hand, at the pouch pressed against her chest. Then he shrugged. "Wait here," he said, "but do not expect anything." He rode off toward the main house. Sarah stood in the sun and waited. Minutes passed. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight. Sweat ran down her back and her legs ached from standing. But she did not move. She had come too far to give up now. Finally, the door of the main house opened. A man walked out. Ignacio Ramirez moved like someone who had never hurried for anyone in his life. He was tall and lean, with silver streaking through his dark hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were the color of winter ice, cold, assessing, empty of warmth. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. When he reached the gate, he did not open it. He just stood on the other side, looking at her through the iron bars like she was an animal at the market. "We give nothing away here," he said. His voice was flat. "No charity, no handouts. If you cannot work, you cannot stay." Sarah felt her courage slipping away. Everything Don Silvano had said was true. This man was like a fortress. There were walls around him so thick that she could not imagine anything getting through. But she thought about the deerskin pouch, about her mother's spices, about the thousands of meals that had gone into making her the cook she was. She lifted her chin and met his cold eyes with her own. "I am not asking for charity," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I know I do not look like much. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I can cook. Real cooking, the kind that feeds more than just the stomach. Give me one chance to prove it. If my food is not good enough, I will leave and never come back." Ignacio Ramirez studied her for a long moment. His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been curiosity, or maybe just surprise that this ragged woman had the nerve to speak to him like an equal. He looked at the skillet, at the pouch, at her face, then he spoke two words that would change Sarah's life forever: "Cook for my men." The gate swung open. Sarah stepped through, knowing that everything she had ever wanted now depended on a single meal. The cookhouse stood apart from the other buildings, long and low, built from dark wood and stone that had weathered decades of sun and wind. Sarah followed a silent ranch hand across the dusty yard, past the bunkhouse where men sat on the porch watching her with suspicious eyes, past the stables where horses stamped and snorted, past a blacksmith shop where sparks flew from an anvil. No one smiled at her, no one said hello. She was an outsider, an intruder, and everyone knew it. One knew. The cookhouse door opened with a tired creak, as if it had forgotten what care felt like. Inside, the air was heavy with old grease and burned coffee. Dirty pots were stacked on every surface. The floor was sticky with spilled food. And in the center of the room, dominating one entire wall, stood a massive cast iron stove that looked like it had not been properly cleaned in years. This was her test, not just cooking a meal, but doing it in a kitchen that had been neglected and abandoned. A kitchen that reflected the coldness of the man who owned it. The ranch hand who had brought her here pointed at the pantry. "Supplies are in there," he said. His voice was flat, uninterested. "Mr. Ramirez wants dinner served at sundown. That is 4 hours from now." Then he left, closing the door behind him. Sarah stood alone in the filthy kitchen. For a moment, the weight of everything pressed down on her. The years of being told she was worthless. The months of rejection. The weeks of walking through the desert with nothing but hope keeping her alive. What if they were right, she thought. What if I really am not good enough? But then she looked down at the skillet in her hand. She felt the weight of it, solid and familiar. She remembered her mother standing over this same skillet, stirring beans and humming a song. She remembered the smell of cumin and oregano filling their tiny cabin. She remembered feeling loved. She set the skillet on the table, then she rolled up her sleeves and went to work. First, the stove. She cleaned out the ash and the grease and the years of neglect. She scrubbed the iron with sand until it gleamed. She arranged kindling in the firebox the way her mother had taught her, creating channels for air to flow. When she struck a match, the fire caught immediately, hungry and eager. Warmth began to spread through the room. That was the first change she made. Next, the kitchen itself. She swept the floor and scrubbed the counters. She organized the pots and pans by size. She washed the windows until light streamed through, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. By the time she was done, the cookhouse looked like a different place. It was still old and worn, but it was clean. It was ready. She went to the pantry. The supplies were basic: sacks of dried beans and flour, onions sprouting in their bins, potatoes with eyes growing long, salt pork wrapped in cloth, slabs of dried beef that were tough as leather. Nothing fresh, nothing kind. But Sarah had learned long ago that love could transform plain ingredients into something extraordinary. She chose the beef and carried it to the cutting board. Her knife moved with practiced precision, trimming away the tough outer edges, cutting the meat into even cubes. She seasoned it with salt and a little pepper, then set it aside. She peeled onions until her eyes watered. She cubed potatoes until her fingers ached. She minced garlic with the back of her knife, releasing the sharp fragrance into the air. Then she opened her pouch. The spices were almost gone now. She had used them sparingly over the past months, knowing that each pinch was precious beyond measure. But this was not a time for holding back. This was the moment that would determine her entire future. She added cumin to the pot, chili powder, a touch of oregano, the single bay leaf carefully placed on top. The smell began to rise. It was subtle at first, just a hint of something different. But as the stew began to simmer, the fragrance grew stronger. It crept out of the cookhouse door. It drifted across the yard. It wrapped itself around the bunkhouse and the stables and the main house itself. Men began to notice. Sarah saw them through the window. Cowboys who had been lounging on the porch suddenly sat up straighter. Workers who had been walking past stopped and lifted their heads, sniffing the air. Even the horses seemed restless, pawing at the ground as if they could sense that something had changed. While the stew simmered, Sarah made biscuits. She mixed flour and lard and buttermilk with her hands, working the dough until it was just right. Not too much kneading, her mother had always said. Biscuits need to breathe. She cut them into rounds and placed them in the oven, watching through the glass as they rose golden and perfect. By the time the sun touched the western horizon, everything was ready. The men filed in silently. There were 12 of them, ranging in age from the young rider who had met her at the gate to grizzled veterans whose faces looked like they had been carved from the same stone as the desert itself. They carried tin plates and cups. They did not speak. They did not smile. They just stared at her with flat, hostile eyes. Sarah stood behind the pot, ladle in hand. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it, but she kept her face calm. She kept her hands steady. One by one they approached. She filled their plates, stew with thick gravy and tender meat, biscuits placed carefully beside each portion, a cup of fresh coffee from a pot she had cleaned and seasoned herself. The men took their food and sat at the long wooden tables. No one ate. They were waiting for something. Then the door opened and Ignacio Ramirez walked in. He looked around the cookhouse slowly, taking in the clean floors and the organized shelves and the light streaming through the windows. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes, something that might have been surprise. He took a plate and held it out to Sarah. She filled it carefully, making sure to give him the best cuts of meat, the thickest gravy. She placed 2 biscuits on the side and poured him coffee from the pot. He sat alone at the end of one table, separate from his men. He picked up his spoon. The room was absolutely silent. Ignacio took his first bite. He chewed slowly. His face remained expressionless. Sarah felt like she was going to faint. Everything depended on this moment. Everything she had worked for, everything she had suffered, all came down to this one man and his judgment. He took another bite, and another. He ate everything on his plate, every scrap of meat, every drop of gravy. Both biscuits. Then he looked up at Sarah. "Who taught you?" he asked. His voice was different now, softer, almost curious. "My mother," Sarah said. He nodded slowly. Just once, then he stood and walked out of the cookhouse without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, the room exploded into noise. Men were eating like they had not tasted real food in months. Spoons scraped against plates. Voices called for seconds, for thirds. Hands reached across tables to grab more biscuits before they were gone. Sarah ladled and served until the pot was empty. By the time the last man left, there was not a single bite of food remaining. She was cleaning up when the door opened again. A middle-aged woman with a stern face entered. She wore a simple dress and an apron, and she carried a bundle of blankets under one arm. "Mr. Ramirez says you can stay," the woman said. Her voice was clipped, businesslike. "There is a room in the back of the cookhouse, small but private. You will cook 3 meals a day for the men. You will be paid fairly for your work. If your cooking gets worse, you will be sent away." Sarah's knees almost buckled with relief. "Thank you," she managed to say. The woman looked at her for a long moment. "Do not thank me," she said. "Thank whatever God taught you to cook like that, because nothing else would have gotten you through that gate." She handed Sarah the blankets and left. That night, Sarah laid in her tiny room and stared at the ceiling. She could hear the wind outside, the same wind that had followed her across the desert. But now it sounded different, less threatening, more like a lullaby. She had a place to sleep, a job to do, food to cook. For the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope. But as she drifted off to sleep, she did not know that her real challenges were just beginning. Because not everyone at Rancho El Mato was happy about her arrival. And there were people in this place who would do anything to see her fail. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn. She made her way to the cookhouse in the gray light before sunrise and started a fire in the stove. By the time the first workers appeared, she had breakfast ready: eggs scrambled with onions, bacon fried crisp, biscuits with honey and fresh butter she had found in the cold storage. The men ate silently, but she could see the difference in their faces. They were not looking at her with hostility anymore. They were looking at her with something that might have been respect, or at least tolerance. She was washing dishes when she heard a commotion outside. Horses were arriving at the main gate, their hooves raising clouds of dust in the morning light. Sarah dried her hands and went to the door to look. A wagon was pulling up to the main house. It was finer than anything she had seen at the ranch, with polished wood and brass fittings that gleamed in the sun. The driver was dressed in formal clothes, like someone who worked for a wealthy family. And sitting in the back of the wagon, her spine straight as a board, was a woman in black. She was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was angular and sharp, like a hawk. Her eyes were dark and cold, and they swept across the ranch like she was looking for something to criticize. When her gaze landed on Sarah standing in the cookhouse doorway, those cold eyes narrowed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She did not know who this woman was, but every instinct told her that trouble had just arrived. Her name was Donna Leah Ramirez. She was Ignacio's aunt, his late mother's sister, and she had ruled the domestic affairs of Rancho El Mato for 15 years. Since the fire that killed Ignacio's wife and son. Since the day the light had gone out of his eyes and he had retreated into himself like a turtle into its shell. Sarah learned all of this from Rosa, the stern-faced woman who had given her the blankets on her first night. Rosa was the head housekeeper, and she had worked at the ranch for over 20 years. She knew everyone's secrets, and she was willing to share them with Sarah, if only as a warning. "Donna Leah ran the kitchen before you came," Rosa said. She was standing in the cookhouse doorway watching Sarah prepare lunch. "She is not a good cook. She never was. But she is family. And Mr. Ramirez gave her authority over the household because he did not care enough to do it himself." "What happened to her kitchen?" Sarah asked. Rosa shrugged. "The men complained. The food was bad and getting worse. Mr. Ramirez finally told her that he would find someone else to cook. She was furious. She said he was betraying family. They argued. That was 3 weeks ago. Then Don Silvano brought word that a young woman was walking north along the fence line with nothing but a skillet and a bag of spices." Sarah's hand stilled on the cutting board. "Don Silvano told him about me." "Don Silvano and Mr. Ramirez were friends once," Rosa said. "A long time ago, before everything went bad. They lost touch after the fire. But Don Silvano still watches out for this place. He still sends word when he sees something worth seeing. She looked at Sarah with something that might have been pity. Donna Leah has not forgiven Mr. Ramirez for replacing her, Rosa said, and she will not forgive you for being the one who took her place. Be careful, girl. She is not a woman who forgets a slight. Sarah thought about this warning all through lunch. She cooked and served and cleaned, but her mind was elsewhere. She had dealt with difficult people before. Her stepfather had been cruel and petty. The townspeople who had rejected her had been cold and dismissive. But something about Donna Leah felt different, more dangerous. She got her first taste of that danger that afternoon. Sarah was in the pantry taking inventory of supplies when she heard the cookhouse door bang open. Footsteps crossed the floor with sharp, angry clicks. When Sarah emerged from the pantry, Donna Leah was standing in the middle of the room like a queen surveying her kingdom. So, the older woman said, her voice was cold and clear, you are the vagrant that my nephew dragged in from the desert. I am the cook, Sarah said quietly. She tried to keep her voice calm, but her heart was racing. Donna Leah laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You are a beggar who happened to wander in at the right moment. Do not confuse luck with talent. She walked slowly around the kitchen, running her finger along the counters, examining the pots and pans. Her lip curled in disgust. I built this kitchen, she said. I managed it for 15 years. I fed these men through droughts and cattle sickness and winters so cold that the water froze in the wells. And now my nephew thinks he can replace me with some half-starved child who does not know her place. She turned to face Sarah, her eyes burning with cold fury. You do not belong here, she said. You are not family. You are nothing but a charity case that Ignacio took pity on because he cannot stand to see anything helpless. Mark my words, you will fail. And when you do, I will be here to pick up the pieces. She swept out of the cookhouse without waiting for a response. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. Sarah stood very still for a long moment. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. You are nothing but a charity case. The words echoed in her head, merging with all the other voices that had told her the same thing throughout her life. Her stepfather, the townspeople, the woman who had said she was not worth the scraps they fed the dogs. For a moment, Sarah wanted to give up, to pack her skillet and her spices and walk back out into the desert, to disappear into the wasteland and let the wind erase her memory. But then she looked at the stove, at the clean counters, at the organized shelves. She had built something here, something real, and she was not going to let anyone take it away from her. She took a deep breath, she wiped her eyes, and she went back to work. That evening, Sarah cooked the best meal she had ever made. She used more of her precious spices, knowing that she had to prove herself all over again. She added extra care to every dish, making sure that the meat was tender, the gravy was rich, the biscuits were perfect. When the men came to eat, they noticed the difference. Several of them actually smiled at her. One old cowboy named Thomas told her that she had the gift. Another man named Jeb asked if she could make pie sometime. It was the first time anyone at the ranch had spoken to her like she was a person instead of an inconvenience. But not everyone was pleased. Donna Leah came to dinner that night. She sat at the head table next to Ignacio, and she watched Sarah serve the men with narrowed eyes. When Sarah brought her a plate, Donna Leah looked at it like it was contaminated. She took one bite, then she set down her fork. This is adequate, she said loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. But it lacks sophistication. Any peasant can throw spices in a pot and call it cooking. True culinary skill requires breeding, education, refinement. She pushed the plate away. I'm sure the men appreciate your efforts, she said to Sarah. They are simple people with simple tastes, but do not expect to impress anyone who knows what real food should taste like. The room went quiet. Everyone was watching. Sarah felt her face burning with humiliation. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but what could she say? She was exactly what Donna Leah described, a poor girl from nowhere with no education and no breeding. The only thing she had was her cooking, and apparently that was not good enough for someone with refined tastes. She took the rejected plate and carried it back to the kitchen. She did not cry. She did not show any emotion at all. But inside, something was crumbling. She was scraping the uneaten food into a pail when she heard someone enter the kitchen behind her. She turned, expecting to see Rosa, or maybe one of the ranch hands. Instead, she saw a man she had never noticed before. He was young, maybe a few years older than her, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of desert sage. His clothes were simple but clean, and there was dirt under his fingernails that spoke of honest work. He had a quiet way about him, like someone who was used to moving through the world without being noticed, and he was carrying something in his hands, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He held it out to her without speaking. Sarah took it, confused. She unwrapped the cloth and found a sprig of wild oregano, fresh and green and fragrant. She looked up at him in surprise. "I found it," he said. His voice was soft, almost shy. "By the creek, south of the pasture. I thought you might want it. For your cooking." Sarah did not know what to say. No one had ever given her a gift like this before. A small thing, but precious. Something that said, "I see you. I notice what you do. I want to help." "Thank you," she managed. The man nodded, then he turned and left, as quietly as he had arrived. Sarah stood holding the oregano for a long moment. Then she lifted it to her nose and breathed in the fresh, sharp scent. For the first time since Donna Leo's cruel words, she felt a small spark of hope. She did not know the man's name yet, but she would learn it soon enough. Julian. Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into a rhythm at Rancho El Mato. She woke before dawn every day. She cooked 3 meals. She cleaned her kitchen until it sparkled. She grew stronger and more confident with each passing day. And Julian kept leaving her gifts. Wild onions wrapped in leaves, mushrooms gathered from a shady grove, pine nuts collected from the trees at the edge of the property. Always left on the cookhouse steps before dawn, always wrapped in the same simple cloth. Sarah never saw him deliver them. But she began to look forward to opening her door each morning and finding a new treasure waiting. She asked Rosa about him. "Julian works with the horses," Rosa said. "He does not speak much. He has been here since he was a boy. Mr. Ramirez took him in when his parents died of fever. Raised him like a son, though he would never admit it. Is he?" Sarah hesitated. "Is he kind?" Rosa looked at her with knowing eyes. "He is the kindest man on this ranch," she said, "but he hides it well. Too much kindness can be a weakness out here. He learned that the hard way." Sarah thought about this as she went about her work. She found herself watching for Julian throughout the day, catching glimpses of him in the stable yard, working with the horses, seeing him at meals, eating quietly in the corner, never speaking to anyone. Their eyes met once across the crowded dining room. He did not smile, but something passed between them. Something unspoken. Something that felt like recognition. One afternoon, Sarah was carrying water from the well when she saw Julian walking toward the stables. He was limping slightly, and when she looked closer, she could see blood dripping from his hand. "Wait," she called out. He stopped, turned, looked at her with those quiet, sage-colored eyes. "Your hand," Sarah said. She set down the water bucket and walked toward him. "You are hurt." He looked at his hand like he had forgotten it was there. "It is nothing," he said. "A horse kicked. The shoe caught my palm. Let me see." She took his hand gently, examining the wound. It was not deep, but it was dirty. Left untreated, it could get infected. In the desert, infection could kill. "Come with me," she said. She led him to the cookhouse. She sat him down at the table and brought clean water and a cloth. She washed the wound carefully, removing every speck of dirt. She tore a strip from an old sheet and bandaged his hand with neat, precise movements. The whole time, Julian did not speak. He just watched her with those quiet eyes. When she was finished, he looked at his bandaged hand for a long moment. "Thank you," he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled. "Thank you for the oregano," she said, "and the onions, and everything else. They have made all the difference." Julian nodded once. Then he stood and walked out of the cookhouse, heading back toward the stables. But from that day on, something changed between them. He still did not speak much. He still left his gifts before dawn, avoiding direct contact. But now, when their eyes met across the dining room, he almost smiled. And Sarah found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day, wondering what he was doing, hoping he was safe. She did not know it yet, but she was falling in love. And she did not know that Donna Leah was watching them both, planning, waiting, looking for any weakness she could exploit. The first act of sabotage happened on a Tuesday. Sarah went to the pantry to get flour for the morning biscuits and found the entire sack crawling with weevils. Hundreds of tiny insects boring through the grain, making it completely unusable. She checked the other sacks. The beans were fine. The cornmeal was fine. Only the flour was contaminated. But that flour had been perfectly good the day before. Sarah was certain of it. She checked every single bomb every single day. It was part of her routine. Someone had done this on purpose. Sarah cleaned out the pantry and threw away the ruined flour. She made breakfast without biscuits, serving the men extra eggs and bacon to compensate. Most of them did not seem to notice the difference. But Donna Leah noticed. "No biscuits this morning," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the dining room. "How disappointing. I suppose even our talented young cook has her limitations." Sarah said nothing. She kept her face calm. But inside, she was seething. The second sabotage happened 3 days later. Sarah woke before dawn, and as usual, and went to the cookhouse to start the fire. But when she opened the stove door, she found the firebox packed with wet ashes. Someone had poured water into the stove overnight, soaking everything. It took her 2 hours to clean out the mess and get the fire going again. Breakfast was late, the men grumbled. Ignacio Ramirez looked at her with cool disappointment in his eyes. "I expect punctuality," he said. That was all. The third sabotage was the worst. Sarah had been preparing a special dinner, a roast beef with all the trimmings, using the last of her mother's spices. She had been working on it all day, making sure every detail was perfect. She stepped out of the cookhouse for just 5 minutes to get water from the well. When she came back, the roast was gone. The platter was empty. The oven door was open. Someone had walked in, taken the meat, and disappeared. Sarah searched everywhere. She asked the ranch hands if they had seen anything. No one knew anything. No one had seen anything. That night, she served beans and cornbread to the men. It was good food, solid food, but it was not what she had planned, not what she had promised. Donna Leah looked at her plate with theatrical disgust. "What a shame," she said. "I heard there was supposed to be roast beef tonight. I suppose something went wrong in the kitchen." These things happen when you hire unqualified staff. Sarah finally lost her temper. "Someone stole the roast," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Someone came into my kitchen and took it while I was getting water." Donna Leah raised an eyebrow. "Are you accusing someone of theft? That is a serious charge. Do you have any proof?" Sarah clenched her fists. "No," she admitted, "I do not." "Then perhaps you simply made a mistake," Donna Leah said smoothly. "Perhaps you forgot to put the roast in the oven in the first place." Memory lapses are common in people who are overwhelmed by their responsibilities. The room was silent. Everyone was watching. Sarah felt the eyes on her, judging her, doubting her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. But she knew that if she lost control now, she would be playing right into Donna Leah's hands. She took a deep breath. "I apologize for the disappointment," she said quietly. "Tomorrow will be better." Then she walked back to the kitchen with as much dignity as she could muster. She was washing dishes when Julian appeared in the doorway. "I saw her," he said. Sarah turned. "What?" Julian's jaw was tight. "Donna Leah. I saw her going into the cookhouse this afternoon." "While you were at the well, I did not think anything of it at the time, but now I understand." Sarah felt cold. "You mean she stole the roast?" Julian nodded. "She is trying to destroy you, to make you look incompetent so that Mr. Ramirez will send you away." "But why? What have I ever done to her?" Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You reminded her of something she lost, something she can never get back." "What do you mean?" He looked at her with those sage-colored eyes. "Come with me," he said. "There is something you need to see." He led her out of the cookhouse and across the dark yard. They walked past the bunkhouse, past the stables, past the main house with its dark windows. Finally, they stopped in front of a small building that Sarah had never noticed before. It was set apart from the others, half hidden by a stand of oak trees. Julian opened the door. Inside was a kitchen, not like the cookhouse with its industrial scale and utilitarian design. This was a home kitchen, warm and intimate, with copper pots hanging on the walls and dried herbs suspended from the ceiling. There was a small table with 2 chairs, A window with curtains that had faded to soft pink. Everything was covered in dust. This was Elena's kitchen, Julian said softly. Mr. Ramirez's wife. She died in the fire 15 years ago. He has not let anyone touch this place since. Sarah looked around in wonder. Why are you showing me this? Julian picked up a small wooden box from the counter. He opened it and held it out to her. Inside were spices, old spices, faded and desiccated, but still recognizable. Cumin, oregano, chili powder. A single bay leaf, brown and brittle. Sarah felt her heart stop. Elena learned to cook from her grandmother, Julian said. She used to make meals that smelled like home. That made everyone feel like family. When she died, Donalia took over the kitchen, but she could never cook the way Elena did. She did not have the gift. He closed the box gently. When you cook, he said, you smell like Elena. You remind everyone of what we lost. Donalia cannot bear it. It makes her feel like a failure, like she has been living a lie for 15 years. Sarah understood now. The hatred she had seen in Donalia's eyes, the desperation behind the sabotage. It was not just jealousy, it was grief, twisted, bitter grief that had curdled into something toxic. What do I do? She asked. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Keep cooking, he said finally. Do not let her break you. That is the only way to win. They walked back to the cookhouse in silence. At the door, Julian paused. I will watch, he said. I will not let her hurt you anymore. Then he disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Sarah went to Ignacio Ramirez. She found him in his study, a dark room filled with ledgers and maps. He looked up when she entered, his face as cold and distant as always. What do you want? He asked. Sarah did not hesitate. I know about Elena, she said. I know about her kitchen. I know that I remind people of her when I cook. And I know that is why your aunt is trying to destroy me. Ignacio's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Go on, he said. Sarah took a deep breath. I am not trying to replace your wife, she said. I never knew her. I never could have known her, but my mother taught me that food is more than fuel. Food is memory. Food is love. And I believe that Elena felt the same way. She held up her deerskin pouch. These are my mother's spices, she said. They are all I have left of her. When I cook with them, I am honoring her memory. I am keeping her alive in the only way I know how. Maybe that is what Elena would have wanted too. Not for her kitchen to stay empty and dusty, but for someone to keep cooking, to keep feeding people, to keep making memories. Ignacio was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. My wife used to say that a house without cooking is just walls and a roof. That food is what makes a building into a home. He paused. I forgot that for a long time. I let this place become empty, cold, dead. He looked at Sarah with eyes that were no longer quite so distant. Keep cooking, he said, and do not worry about my aunt. I will speak to her. Sarah nodded. Thank you, she said. She turned to leave, but at the door she stopped. Julian told me about Elena, she said, about her kitchen, about what she meant to everyone here. I think you should open that kitchen again. Not to erase her memory, but to honor it. Then she walked out before he could respond. That night, Donalia did not come to dinner, and the sabotage stopped. 3 months passed at Rancho El Mato. The summer heat gave way to autumn coolness. The leaves on the oak trees turned gold and red. The days grew shorter and the nights grew longer. Sarah's cooking improved with each meal. She experimented with new recipes, combining her mother's spices with ingredients she found on the ranch. Wild sage from the hillsides, peppers that grew in the kitchen garden, honey from the beehives behind the barn. The men began to change too. They smiled more. They laughed more. They lingered over meals instead of rushing back to work. Thomas, the old cowboy, told her that he had not felt this good in 20 years. Jeb asked her to teach him how to make biscuits so he could impress a girl in town. Even Ignacio seemed different. He still did not talk much, but there was a softness in his eyes that had not been there before. Sometimes Sarah caught him watching her cook, a look of wonder on his face, like he was seeing something he had thought was lost forever. And Julian had become her shadow. He was always nearby, watching, protecting. He left his gifts on her doorstep every morning without fail. Wildflowers now, along with the herbs and vegetables. Small things that said, I am thinking of you, I care about you, I am here. They did not speak of their feelings, but they both knew. And that knowing was enough, for now. Rosa noticed, of course, she noticed everything. He has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you, Rosa told Sarah one afternoon. They were sitting on the cookhouse porch, shelling peas in the warm autumn sunlight. In all the years I have known him, he has never let anyone get close. He was afraid of losing someone the way Mr. Ramirez lost Elena. But he is not afraid anymore, Sarah said. Rosa smiled. No, he is not. Donna Leah had retreated to her room in the main house. She emerged only rarely, and when she did, she avoided the cookhouse entirely. Sarah felt guilty sometimes, knowing that her presence had caused the older woman so much pain. But she also knew that she had done nothing wrong. She had simply been herself, and sometimes being yourself is enough to change everything. The fire started on a night in late October. Sarah was asleep in her small room when she heard the shouting. She bolted upright, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see an orange glow illuminating the sky. She threw on her clothes and ran outside. The stable was burning. Flames poured from the windows, reaching toward the stars like grasping hands. Smoke billowed across the yard, thick and black and choking. Horses screamed in terror, their cries cutting through the roar of the fire. Men were running in all directions, carrying buckets, shouting orders, trying to organize some kind of response. But there was no organization. There was only chaos. Sarah saw Ignacio standing frozen at the edge of the firelight. His face was white. His hands were trembling. He was staring at the flames like he was seeing something that no one else could see. Elena, his wife, his son. The fire that had taken everything from him 15 years ago. He could not move. He was trapped in his memories, paralyzed by grief. Sarah ran to him. She grabbed his arm and shook him. Mr. Ramirez, she shouted. Mr. Ramirez, you have to help us. The horses. We need to save the horses. He did not respond. His eyes were blank. He was somewhere else entirely. Sarah realized that he was not going to help. That he could not help. The fire had broken something inside him that had never fully healed. So she took command. Thomas, she shouted, get buckets from the well. Jeb, start a line, pass water hand to hand. Everyone else, follow me. The men hesitated for just a moment. Then they obeyed. Sarah ran toward the burning stable. The heat was incredible, pressing against her skin like a physical force. Smoke filled her lungs, making her cough and gag. But she did not stop. The stable doors were closed. She could hear the horses inside, screaming, kicking against their stalls. Help me, she shouted. Two ranch hands appeared beside her. Together they grabbed the door handle and pulled. The wood was hot, blistering their hands, but they did not let go. Finally, the doors swung open. Smoke and flame poured out. Sarah covered her face with her arm and pushed inside. The stable was an inferno. The hayloft above was fully engulfed, raining burning debris down on the stalls below. Horses reared and bucked, their eyes rolling with terror. Sarah ran from stall to stall, throwing open latches, driving the horses toward the door. One by one, they galloped past her, their manes smoking, their hooves sparking on the stone floor. She had freed 7 horses when she heard someone call her name. Sarah, it was Julian. He was inside the stable, at the far end, trying to free a horse that had become tangled in its harness. Hold on, Sarah shouted. I am coming. She fought her way through the soot and flames. The heat was unbearable now. Every breath felt like swallowing fire. But she kept moving. She reached Julian and saw the problem immediately. The horse was wild with fear, pulling against the ropes that held it, making the tangles worse with every movement. We have to cut it free, Sarah said. Do you have a knife? Julian pulled a blade from his belt and started sawing at the ropes. Sarah held the horse's head, trying to calm it, whispering soothing words even as the fire roared around them. Finally, the last rope snapped. The horse bolted toward the door, knocking Julian aside as it went. Julian hit the ground hard. Sarah heard him cry out in pain. She ran to him. Are you hurt? My leg, he gasped. I think it is broken. A beam crashed down behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. The ceiling was starting to collapse. We have to move, Sarah said. Now, she grabbed Julian under the arms and dragged him toward the door. He was heavy, much heavier than she had expected, and her muscles screamed in protest. But she did not stop. Behind her, the roof caved in with a terrible roar. Flames exploded outward. Sarah felt the heat on her back, singeing her hair, burning her clothes. But she kept moving. She dragged Julian out of the stable and across the yard, putting distance between them and the inferno. When she was sure they were safe, she collapsed beside him, gasping for breath. The stable burned until there was nothing left but charred timbers and glowing embers. But every single horse had survived, and so had Julian. Sarah sat with him through the night, holding his hand, waiting for the doctor to arrive from town. His leg was indeed broken, but it was a clean break, the kind that would heal with time and care. "You saved my life," Julian whispered. "You would have done the same for me," Sarah said. He looked at her with those sage-colored eyes. "I love you," he said. "I should have told you before. But I was afraid." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I love you too," she said. They held hands as the sun rose over the ruined stable, and despite everything they had lost, they both knew that they had found something far more valuable. As the day brightened, Ignacio Ramirez came to find them. He looked older than he had the night before, worn, exhausted. But there was something else in his eyes too, something that looked like life. "You saved the ranch," he said to Sarah. "I froze. I could not move. And you took command." He shook his head slowly. 15 years ago, I lost my wife and son because I could not save them. I have lived with that guilt every day since. I built walls around myself. I shut out everyone who might have helped me heal. I let myself become a ghost." He looked at her with gratitude and shame mixed in equal measure. "You ran into a fire that I was too afraid to face. You did what I could not do. And because of you, this ranch is still standing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I have been thinking about the future," he said, "about what happens to this place after I am gone. I have no children, no heirs, but I have seen what you can do. I have seen who you are." He handed her the paper. "This is a deed," he said, "to the cookhouse, the land it stands on, and a share in the business of feeding this ranch. I want you to be my partner. I want you to have a stake in this place. I want you to belong here, not as an employee, but as family." Sarah stared at the paper in her hands. She could not speak. She could not breathe. "You do not have to answer now," Ignacio said. "Take your time. Think about it." He turned to go, then he stopped. "Elena would have liked you," he said quietly. "She would have been proud to know you." Then he walked away, leaving Sarah holding her future in her hands. The truth about the fire came out 3 days later. Sarah was in the cookhouse preparing lunch for the men who were still working to clear the debris from the burned stable. Julian was resting in the bunkhouse, his broken legs splinted and bandaged, under strict orders from the doctor to stay off his feet for at least 6 weeks. She was stirring a pot of soup when Rosa burst through the door. "You need to come," Rosa said. Her face was pale and her voice was shaking. "Right now. They found something." Sarah followed Rosa across the yard to where a group of men had gathered near the ruins of the stable. Ignacio was there, standing with his arms crossed, his face like thunder. In the center of the group was Donalia. She was on her knees in the ash, her fine black dress ruined, her silver hair coming loose from its bun. 2 ranch hands stood behind her, their hands on her shoulders, preventing her from running. "Tell them," Ignacio said. His voice was cold and hard. "Tell them what you told me." Donalia lifted her head. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was defiance in them too, a stubborn pride that would not bend. "I started the fire," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "I started the fire," Donalia repeated, louder this time. "I knocked over a lantern in the stable. On purpose. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to hurt someone. I wanted everyone to feel as miserable as I felt." She looked at Sarah with hatred burning in her eyes. "You took everything from me," she spat. "My kitchen, my purpose, my place in this family. When you arrived, everyone started acting like I did not exist anymore. Like I had never mattered. Like 15 years of service meant nothing compared to 1 month of your cooking." She laughed bitterly. "I thought if I could make you fail, if I could prove that you were incompetent, everything would go back to the way it was before. But nothing I did worked. The flour, the stove, the roast, None of it is enough. You just kept cooking. You just kept smiling. You just kept winning. Tears were streaming down her face now, so I decided to burn it all down. If I could not have my life back, then no one would have anything. I was going to let the horses die. I was going to let the fire spread to the main house. I was going to destroy everything my brother's family had built. She looked at Sarah with something that might have been grudging respect. But you ran into the flames. You saved the horses. You saved Julian. You saved this whole ranch. Even after everything I did to you, you still tried to save us. She shook her head slowly. I do not understand you, she whispered. I do not understand how anyone can be that good. The yard was silent. Everyone was staring at Donalia like she was a stranger they had never seen before. Ignacio finally spoke. What you did could have killed people, he said. It did kill my property. It destroyed something that took years to build. He stepped closer to his aunt. But it also showed me something, he continued. It showed me that I have been blind. Blind to your pain. Blind to your loneliness. Blind to the fact that you have been suffering in silence while I hid in my own grief. He knelt down beside her. Elena loved you, he said. She treated you like a sister. When she died, you stepped in and kept this ranch running while I fell apart. You cooked and cleaned and managed for 15 years without any thanks, without any recognition, without any love. His voice cracked. I failed you, he said. I was so wrapped up in my own loss that I forgot that you had lost her too. I forgot that you were grieving too. I forgot that you needed me as much as I needed her. Donalia was sobbing now. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I am so sorry, she cried. I am so sorry. I did not mean to hurt anyone. I was just so angry, so sad, so alone. Sarah stepped forward. Everyone was watching her, waiting to see what she would do. The woman who had been sabotaged and attacked and nearly killed by the flames this old woman had set. She knelt down in the ash beside Donalia. My mother used to say that hurt people, Sarah said quietly, that the cruelest actions come from the deepest wounds. She used to say that the only way to break the cycle is to respond to hate with love, even when it is hard, even when it feels impossible. She took Donalia's hand. I forgive you, she said. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Donalia stared at her in disbelief. You cannot, she whispered. After everything I did, you cannot. I can, Sarah said. And I do. She helped the older woman to her feet. But forgiveness is not the same as trust, Sarah continued. Trust has to be earned, and that is going to take time. A lot of time. Donalia nodded. She seemed smaller somehow, older. The anger that had sustained her for so long had finally burned itself out, leaving nothing but ashes. What happens now? She asked. Ignacio answered. Now you go to town, to the sheriff. You turn yourself in and you accept whatever consequences come from what you have done. He paused. When you have paid your debt, you can come back. If you want to, this is still your home. It always will be. But things are going to be different from now on. We are going to be different. Donalia nodded slowly. Then she looked at Sarah one last time. Elena was right about you, she said. You do have the gift. Then she turned and walked toward the wagon that would take her to town. She did not look back. That night, Sarah cooked dinner for the ranch as she did every night. But something had changed. The air felt lighter. The laughter came easier. Even the food seemed to taste better. Julian hobbled into the dining room on a pair of crutches that Thomas had carved for him. He sat beside Sarah at the table, his broken leg propped up on a chair, and he smiled at her with those sage-colored eyes. Hell of a week, he said. Sarah laughed. That is one way to put it. He reached over and took her hand. I meant what I said, he whispered. In the fire. About loving you, I know, Sarah said. I meant it too. They sat together holding hands, watching the men eat and joke and argue the way families do. And Sarah realized that this was what she had been searching for her whole life. Not just a place to cook, a place to belong. 6 months later, Donalia came back. She had served her time in the county jail, 90 days for arson and property destruction. The judge had been lenient, considering her age and the fact that no one had been killed. But the experience had changed her. Everyone could see it. Her hair was grayer, her face was more lined, but there was something else too. a softness that had not been there before, a humility that replaced the old arrogance. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon carrying a single bag and wearing a simple cotton dress instead of her usual black finery. Sarah saw her from the cookhouse window and felt her stomach clench with uncertainty. But she had meant what she said about forgiveness. And forgiveness meant giving second chances. She walked out to meet the returning woman. "Welcome back," Sarah said. Donalia looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something that Sarah had never seen her do before. She smiled. "I brought you something," Donalia said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the same box that Julian had shown her months ago. The one from Elena's kitchen, the one filled with old spices. "I found it in my room," Donalia said. "Elena gave it to me before she died. She told me to keep it safe, to pass it on to someone who would understand what it meant." She held the box out to Sarah. "I was not that person," she said. "I kept the box, but I never understood what was inside. But you do. You understand." Sarah took the box with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Donalia nodded. "May I see the kitchen?" They walked together to the cookhouse. Sarah pushed open the door and stepped aside to let Donalia enter. The older woman looked around slowly, taking in the clean counters and organized shelves, the herbs drying in bundles from the ceiling, the copper pots gleaming on their hooks. She breathed in the smell of bread baking and soup simmering. "It smells like her kitchen," Donalia said softly. "Like Elena's kitchen." "That is the highest compliment you could give me," Sarah said. They stood in silence for a moment. "I never apologized properly," Donalia said finally, "for what I did to you, for the flour and the stove and the roast, for all the cruel things I said." "You apologized," Sarah said. "Not really," Donalia replied. "I confessed, I admitted what I did. But I never said I was sorry. I never told you how much I regret it. I never asked for your forgiveness properly." She turned to face Sarah. "So I am asking now. I am sorry for everything. Can you forgive me?" Sarah thought about the flour crawling with weevils, the stove filled with wet ash, the roast stolen from her oven, the cruel words in front of everyone. But she also thought about her mother's words. Hurt people hurt people. The only way to break the cycle is love. "I already forgave you," Sarah said. "But I accept your apology anyway." Donalia's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Now." Sarah smiled. "Would you like to help me with dinner?" The older woman looked surprised. "You want my help? This kitchen is big enough for 2 cooks. And you know things that I do not. Recipes from the old country, techniques that your grandmother taught you, knowledge that should not be lost." She held out a spare apron. "What do you say?" Donalia took the apron slowly, like it was made of gold. "I say yes." That night, they cooked together. Sarah showed Donalia the spices her mother had taught her to use. Donalia taught Sarah how to make tamales the way her grandmother had made them, wrapped in corn husks and steamed until they were perfect. The men ate twice as much as usual. In the weeks that followed, the 2 women settled into an uneasy partnership that slowly grew into friendship. They were never going to be close, not after everything that had happened, but they learned to respect each other, to appreciate each other's strengths. And together they made Rancho Amato's kitchen the best in the territory. Julian's leg healed completely by spring. He walked with a slight limp that the doctor said would fade with time, but otherwise he was as strong as ever. On the first day of May, he asked Sarah to walk with him. They went to the hill behind the ranch, where wildflowers bloomed in carpets of yellow and purple. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Below them, the ranch spread out like a painting, peaceful and prosperous. Julian stopped at the top of the hill and turned to face Sarah. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. When he opened it, Sarah saw a ring, simple silver with a tiny turquoise stone that matched the color of the sky. "This was my mother's," Julian said. "My father gave it to her when they got married. When she died, I kept it. I told myself I was saving it for someone special, someone worth giving it to." He looked at Sarah with all the love in the world shining in his eyes. "Sarah Layton, will you marry me?" Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The desert, the hunger, the loneliness, the fire. She thought about her mother's spices, about Don Silvano at the crossroads, about Julian's gifts left on her doorstep every morning. She thought about the word yes and what it would mean. It would mean staying, belonging, building a life in this place that had become her home. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Julian slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her close and kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. Below them, the lights of the ranch began to glow in the gathering darkness. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney. Voices drifted up from the bunkhouse. Everything Sarah had ever wanted was right here in her arms, and she was never cunning to let it go. They were married on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. Sarah wore a white dress that Rosa had helped her make, simple and beautiful, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Julian wore a new shirt and his best boots, and he could not stop smiling. The whole ranch gathered for the ceremony. Thomas stood as Julian's best man. Rosa stood as Sarah's witness. Ignacio Ramirez performed the ceremony himself, reading words from a book that had belonged to Elena. Even Donna Leah was there, sitting quietly in the back row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. When Julian kissed his bride, everyone cheered. After the ceremony, there was a feast. Sarah had been cooking for days, preparing all of her best dishes. Roast beef with gravy, fresh bread with honey butter, tamales that she and Donna Leah had made together, and for dessert, an apple pie made with apples from the trees that Elena had planted 20 years ago. The men ate until they could not eat anymore. Then they danced to music played on guitars and fiddles. Then they ate again. As the sun set, Sarah slipped away from the celebration and walked to Elena's kitchen. She had cleaned it out months ago with Ignacio's permission. Now it was her private space, her sanctuary. She sat at the small table and looked around at the copper pots on the walls, at the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, at the window with its faded pink curtains. "I hope I have made you proud," she said quietly. "I hope I have honored your memory." There was no answer, but Sarah felt something, a warmth, a presence, a sense that she was not alone. She thought about her own mother, about the spices that had started everything, about the long road from poverty and rejection to love and belonging. She opened the wooden box that Donna Leah had given her. Elena's spices were inside, alongside her own mother's spices. Two histories, two legacies, joined together. Sarah lifted a pinch of cumin to her nose and breathed in. The smell was memory. The smell was love. The smell was home. She closed her eyes and smiled. Then she stood up and went back to her wedding celebration, where her husband and her family were waiting. That night, Julian carried her across the threshold of their new home, a small cottage that the men had built for them on the edge of the property. It had 2 rooms, a fireplace, and a kitchen with a cast-iron stove. Sarah's cast-iron skillet hung on the wall, polished and perfect, ready to cook 1,000 more meals. Julian set her down gently. He looked around at their home with wonder. "I never thought I would have this," he said. "A wife, a home, a family." "Neither did I," Sarah said. They held each other in the firelight. "We built this together," Julian whispered. "From nothing, from ashes." Sarah thought about that word, ashes. The ashes of her old life, the ashes of the burned stable, the ashes of Donna Leah's hatred. From ashes, new things grew. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Julian replied. Outside, the wind had a name, but now there were people to speak it. 10 years later, Sarah stood on the porch of her cottage and watched the sun rise over Rancho El Mato. So much had changed. The ranch had grown into one of the largest and most prosperous operations in the territory. The cookhouse had expanded twice to feed all the workers. Sarah had trained 5 young women to cook the way she cooked, passing on her mother's knowledge to a new generation. Julian ran the horse breeding program now. His animals were famous throughout Texas for their strength and beauty. He still walked with a slight limp, but he barely noticed it anymore. They had 3 children. Maria, named for Julian's mother. Thomas, named for the old cowboy who had become like a grandfather to them. And Elena, named for the woman whose spirit still lingered in the kitchen where Sarah had found her calling. Ignacio Ramirez had died peacefully in his sleep 2 years ago. He had left the entire ranch to Sarah and Julian, making them full partners with all the other workers. His last words had been about Elena, about how happy he was that he would see her again. Donna Leah still lived on the ranch in a small cottage near the main house. She was old now, her hair completely white, her movements slow and careful. But she came to the cookhouse every day to help with meals. She and Sarah had become true friends over the years. Sometimes, when they cooked together, they talked about Elena, about recipes she had loved, about things she had said. Rosa had retired but still visited every week for dinner. Thomas had finally passed away last winter, but his spirit lived on in the stories the men told around the fire. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were no longer the smooth hands of a young woman. They were worn and calloused from years of work. But they were strong hands, capable hands, hands that had built something lasting. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Julian was standing there, holding a cup of coffee. His hair was gray at the temples now, but his eyes were still the color of desert sage. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Sir said. "The past, the future, how far we have come." Julian smiled. He handed her the coffee and put his arm around her shoulders. "Remember when you first came here?" he said. "You were so thin and so tired. I thought the wind might blow you away." Sarah laughed. "I was pretty pitiful." "No," Julian said. "You were the strongest person I had ever seen. You just did not know it yet." They stood together, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Below them, the ranch was coming to life. Smoke rose from the cookhouse. Men walked toward the stables. Children ran across the yard, chasing chickens. Sarah thought about her mother, about the spices that had started everything, about the long road from nothing to everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Julian asked. "Coming here, staying here, giving your life to this place?" Sarah shook her head. Not for a single moment. She turned to look at her home, at the cottage where her children slept, at the cookhouse where her legacy lived on, at the ranch that had become her family. "My mother used to say that food is memory," she said, "that when you feed someone, you give them a piece of yourself." I think she was right, but I also think she missed something. "What is that?" Julian asked. Julian. "Food is not just memory. Food is love. Food is hope. Food is the promise that tomorrow will be better than today." She lifted her face to the sunrise. "I came here with nothing," she said. "A skillet and a bag of spices. I thought I was worthless. I thought I would never amount to anything. But my mother was right. Food can turn strangers into family, and love can turn ashes into gold." Julian pulled her closer. "You were never worthless," he said. "You just needed someone to see your worth." Sarah smiled. "You saw it. I saw you," Julian said. The rest was obvious. They kissed in the golden morning light. Then Sarah straightened her apron and headed toward the cookhouse. There was breakfast to make, people to feed, love to share. The wind had a name out here in West Texas, and now Sarah knew what it was. Hope.